right, welcome everyone to another amazing Ionic show. I'm Mike Hartington, head of DevRel here at Ionic. I'm joined by Ionic's own CEO, Max Lynch. How's it going, Max?
Good, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm always excited when we have these Ionic shows because we get to not only talk about all the cool stuff that we do across the company, but we also get to hear from the community in the Q&A section at the end. So I guess let's kind of jump right into it because we got a lot to talk about. 2022 was an incredible year, and 2023 is starting to shape up to be an even better year. Kind of want to know, where do you think we're going to be going in 2023? We'll hit the hard question first.
Yeah. Well, I think to know where we're going, we kind of have to take a step back and look at what's going on in the market or, the economy, if you will. I think everyone knows that companies have been scaling back quite a bit. We've had, reports of layoffs and all this stuff, and we hate to see that. But I think what's happened is companies and teams are really trying to do more with less. And if you look at Ionic and everything we do here, we've been about doing that since day one, right? Our whole thing is making it easier, faster, cheaper to build mobile apps by, building a single code base that can run everywhere. So if you just look at what's going on and you look at what we do, I think 2023 for us is all about continuing to just do more of that and iterating on what we're already doing. So if you look at what we've shipped on the VS Code extension side, it's all about trying to make it much faster to build mobile apps because that's what companies want, right? They don't want to spend all this money building multiple different versions of an app or use, slower frameworks if they don't have to. They want to move very quickly. So we want to help them do that. So better tooling with VS Code in our VS Code extension, new components and updated versions of our components that we'll talk about with framework, more plugins. So we just want to help companies and teams work really quickly and build, really great apps, but a lot faster than ever before, basically.
Yeah, like you said, the focus of being able to do more with less. That's day one stuff for us, and it's great to see that mission has not changed, and there's still a need for it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of gets lost in the discussion around all the different the options in the mobile space. Uh, People wonder where we fit into all that, and like we are the fastest, easiest, cheapest way to build really good mobile apps. Period. There's nothing faster than Ionic and Capacitor because everything else requires either different languages that fewer people know, multiple versions of an app. You don't get maybe web or desktop at the same time with the same code. So there's all these other trade-offs, but we've always been about that, and that hasn't changed.
Now, you mentioned capacitor, and it feels like capacitor it's gotten multiple rounds of like revitalized energy from the community. I know I look at npm installs every month, and it seems just like it's taken off yet again, which is always fun to see. What do you think about this? Found interest in capacitor.
Yeah, the project is really it's going through another moment right now. And I think what's going on is you've got this new generation of developers that maybe they didn't know about Cordova Phone Gap. They don't come from that era. They didn't use those tools. And so if they started programming in or they started doing web development, in 2020, let's just say, uh, they didn't have that kind of knowledge, that wisdom of hybrid app development. And so, there's been a lot of other options in the space that have kind of told people that if you want to build a mobile app as a web developer, you need to learn Dart. You need to kind of target this custom environment that React Native has. And Capacitor has always been here as a way to let web developers use standard web technology, all their favorite frameworks, and build really great software. And so I think people are just discovering that is a thing. And it sounds funny to us because we've been doing it for 10 years. So we just assume that everyone knows about this stuff already, but they just don't. It's kind of this knowledge that's gotten lost to time, if you will. And people are rediscovering it and they're realizing, hey, if I don't have to use Dart because I like JavaScript, right? If I don't have to throw out all my favorite React libraries because they don't work in React Native, then I don't have to. If I can just use Capacitor, I can build standard web apps, which is what I want to do as a web developer, and deploy them on iOS and Android, desktop web, etc. Like that is really compelling. And so people are just rediscovering it. We've had a lot of interesting, indie developers and startups start to use it, and that kind of gets that, Twitter uh, hype train going. So we've always played the long game with Capacitor. We think web technologies, they're here to stay. They're not going anywhere. They're a good, safe, long-term bet. And I think that's, we've been able to prove that. And so that's driving a lot of that interest, that renewed interest in Capacitor.
Yeah, with that, I mean, there's also like more people just asking questions like, how does capacitor work? How can I do, XYZ in capacitor? And you've written a blog post about this not too long ago, correct?
Yeah. So I think, a lot of people want to know how something like Capacitor is different from all the other options out there, how it works. There's a lot of kind of misunderstandings. There's, people don't always know about how these different technologies work. And they also want to know how, where Capacitor fits in our own world. We've got Ionic framework, we've got all these other things. And sometimes it's confusing to know, like, do I need Ionic framework? Do I not need it? What is Capacitor, et cetera. So a few weeks ago, I wrote a pretty long blog post kind of answering a bunch of those questions. We'll share the link that, so people can check it out. But if you want to know how we look at Capacitor strategically, how it works, how it compares to React Native, Flutter, or whatever, everything that you might want to know is answered in there. If it's not, feel free to ask me on Twitter or in the forum posts that we link there. But definitely check that out. It's a really good resource.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll share the link with folks that way they can check it out. Now, last year we ended, kind of our opening segment with the question of, is 2022 going to be the year of PWA? And I think it's safe to say that there were some strides made. It got a lot better, but still wasn't the year that it took off. Do you think 2023 is going to be the year of PWAs?
Well, if you asked me that a few weeks ago, I would have said, same answer. There's still always, it's always going to be the year, and it never is, except for one little thing that happened a few weeks ago, which was Apple releasing push notification support for PWAs. They don't use that word, that term, which is
I
hilarious.
think
They'll
they
never say it.
they use the term home screen web apps.
Yeah, it's so cringe. But if you install it on the home screen, then you can get access to push notifications. So I think that will change a lot of people's thinking about whether or not they need an installed app in the App Store. However, I think what people forget or gets lost in this discussion is it's not just about like the technological capability of this feature being able to do push notifications. It's about user habits and user behavior. The reality is, most people know that if they want something on mobile, they go to the App Store to find it. And if you do that on iOS and you only do a PWA, customers and users who expect to find the app in the App Store won't find it because it's not in there. And Apple, yes, they rolled out push notification support, but they haven't shown any sign that they're ever going to index PWAs in the App Store like Google has in the Play Store. So I think the whole thing about Capacitor is that you don't have to choose between the two. You can do both. And I keep telling people that, like, you don't have to pick, but for some reason people still think it's either or. It's not either or. You build a web app, build it PWA first, and then if you use Capacitor, you can deploy that as a PWA for users who want it that way, or you can basically, with very little work, deploy it to the App Store as well with the same code. So now you're everywhere that your users might be coming from, whether that's a Google search and land on your PWA or in the App Store and download and install the app. So I like that solution because you don't have to trade. There's no trade-off. You get the best of both worlds. So for me, I think it's maybe almost the year of the PWA, but user behavior is so ingrained that we're not going to change that anytime soon.
Well, thankfully, we have Capacitor to let us do more without having to have multiple code bases. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Max. We have a lot to talk about, and I know you're super busy, so we're not going to keep you here all day. But I want to talk to Liam next, who's going to introduce some awesome updates for Framework. So let's get Liam up here.
Thanks, Mike.
Awesome. Well, hey, Liam, thank you so much for joining us today. How you
Thank you
doing?
for having me. I'm doing well. How are you?
You know, snow's melted, ground's a little mushy, so it's end of winter, beginning of springtime in New England. Not thrilled about it, but I'm happy it's not cold anymore.
There you go.
So enough about the weather and what it's like living in New England. We're here to talk about Framework today, and we've got some pretty awesome updates to share with people, right?
Yeah, we got a lot in Ionic 7. So we recently announced Ionic 7. It is, of course, the successor to Ionic 6, as numbers work. So we recently entered into release candidate, which is very, very exciting. So that means that the API is stable, the features are all in. We'll get to those features in just a second, but it means you can start upgrading your applications right now. There will still be some bugs, but overall the API is stable and it should be a pretty solid experience throughout. So in terms of features, we've got a lot of great features. The big focus for Ionic 7 was on developer experience. We want to make Ionic Framework easy to use, enjoyable to use, and to do that, we need to make sure we're continuing to look at the developer experience, see if we can sort of smooth over any rough patches in the API and things like that. So 3 big features that we added. The first is inline overlays. For those of you that used Ionic 6, you may recall that in Ionic 6, we made it possible for Ion Modal and Ion Popover to be used declaratively in your template. That means you can write Ion Modal and interact with the component that way, instead of having to rely on the modal controller or the popover controller. The community reception to that was overwhelmingly positive. People loved those features. And so in Ionic 7, we're extending that declarative overlay feature to the rest of the overlay components. So action sheets, alerts, toasts, those sorts of things. You can now use every single Ionic overlay component in your template without relying on the controllers. The controllers still exist, but for those that prefer the declarative approach, you can now use them in Ionic 7. So we're really, really excited to roll that feature out. The next big improvement is around consistent event emissions. So typically in Ionic, and for really as long as Ionic has existed, the ion change event has always been emitted whenever the value property changes. So for example, if you have an ion input, a text input, and the value property changed on that component, that would cause the ion change event to fire. And that may seem, you might think, okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? The value's changing, so the change event should fire. This was actually a little unexpected because it meant that the ion change event fired whenever the user typed, but it also meant that the ion change event fired whenever the application programmatically set the value of the component, rather than a user committed gesture. And so this resulted in ion change firing at somewhat unexpected times. And so with Ionic 7, we've updated how ion change fires so that it only fires as a result of user interaction. So a click, user typing, those sorts of things. And so if you're familiar with the native input element, the native input and change events, we've aligned very, very closely with those events built into the browser. So if you're familiar with those events, you'll be familiar with the new ion change behavior. This is another great developer experience improvement. It makes Ionic Framework more predictable and more debuggable. It's going to sort of get the framework out of the way so that you can continue building amazing apps. And then the third and final big feature is we are introducing a new and simplified form control syntax. So in Ionic 6 and earlier versions, whenever you wanted to use a form control, so that's a checkbox, a text input, a toggle, you had to use 3 components. One is the form control, so ion input. You had to use an ion label, and you had to wrap both of those components in an ion item. You had to use 3 components just to get a single functional form control. It worked, but that was a lot of boilerplate just to get a form control working. There were other bugs where, things would re-render at the wrong time. They would re-render incorrectly. There were some accessibility issues. So in Ionic 7, we're introducing a simplified form control syntax so that you only need to use the form control. So if you go from V6 and earlier forms when you had the item, the label, and the input, now you can get rid of the item, you can get rid of the label, and you can just use the ion input, and you get a fully functional input that works well with assistive technology such as talkback and voiceover. You can, of course, continue to use ion item, right? Like if you have a text input inside of a list view, you'd want to continue using ion item, but it's no longer required in any sort of context. So those are three big improvements. And for the simplified form control syntax, we're keeping the sort of older or legacy syntax so you can continue to use it through all of V7, because we realize it is a bit of a significant change from how Ionic has done things over the past few years. So you can continue to use the old syntax. You don't need to migrate to the new form syntax in order to upgrade to Ionic 7. It's just there if you want to begin to migrate if you're an earlier adopter. So those are the three big features, but we didn't stop there. We actually have several other improvements in Ionic 7. So the first is with performance. Performance is always something that we're continuing to look at. It's a never-ending, I don't want to say battle, but it's a never-ending adventure of all sorts of fun things for how can we make Ionic even faster. So in Ionic 7, tab switches, right? Switching between tab 1 and tab 2, the time between when one tab hides and the other tab is shown. We actually made those up to 70% faster, and I'm not just making that number up. That is an actual number that I computed very scientifically. So in Ionic React and Ionic View, tab switches are up to 70% faster because of some optimizations we made inside of Ionic Framework. And then for you Ionic Angular developers, we made it so that every single Ionic component initializes quicker than it did before, thanks to some optimizations in the new version of Stencil, which is really, really great. So everyone is getting performance improvements just by updating to Ionic 7. For you Vite developers, we've also improved Ionic 7's compatibility with Vite, and especially vtest. There were some confusing developer experiences in Ionic 6 around vtest. And so to do that, we removed the common JS entry points for Ionic React and Ionic View, which should really smooth over the developer experience for using Vite and especially vtest in Ionic 7. So those are the things that we added. We did remove two features from Ionic 7. The first is Ion Slides, and the second is Ion Virtual Scroll. These were two changes that we announced back when Ionic 6 came out in 2021, around that time. And so we're removing these features in favor of using the third-party solutions that are already out there. So I'll start with Ion Slides. So Ion Slide and Ion Slides, those two components have been removed in Ionic 7. Now, we're removing those components in favor of using a library called Swiper.js. And for those that don't know, Swiper.js is the same library that Ion Slides use under the hood. So we're just removing the Ionic wrappers, and you're able to use the package Swiper.js directly. So this has a few benefits. One is you get access to newer bug fixes. Two, you get more features. Ion Slides was a little restrictive in how many features it exposed from Swiper.js, so you get access to more features. You also get access to a newer version of Swiper. The Ion Slides component used, I believe, a version of Swiper that was about 4 major releases old. And so now everyone gets access to the latest and greatest Swiper.js, all the amazing features right in your application. And because it's the same library, when you migrate from Ion Slides to Swiper.js, the behavior of your slides components should more or less remain the same. Some things will need to be renamed, but otherwise the behavior should more or less be the same. We also have migration guides on our documentation website that shows you how to get set up with Swiper.js. So that's the Ion Slides removal. The next change is the Ion Virtual Scroll removal. So Ion Virtual Scroll is a virtual scroller component inside of Ionic. It helps you work with large sets of data in a performant way without slowing down your application. This has been removed in favor of using solutions that are provided by JavaScript frameworks. So Ion Virtual Scroll it was built as a web component, but it really only worked with Ionic Angular. And so that meant Ionic React and Ionic Vue developers really didn't have a virtual scrolling solution in their Ionic applications. And so with Ionic 7, we're removing Ion Virtual Scroll and making recommendations for existing and really robust third-party solutions that exist for virtual scrolling. So for Angular developers, you've got CDK scrolling, which is, I believe, maintained by the Angular team, so you know it's going to work really, really well. The second is Virtuoso for you Ionic React developers. That is a great package that's been around for a few years and is really, really well maintained. It's a very performant and very feature-rich library. And then for you Ionic Vue developers, you have Vue Virtual Scroller, which is another really great package that's really well maintained for Vue 3. So you've got those. You can, of course, use any virtual scrolling solution that you want, but those are the three that we think will give you the best experience in your Ionic applications. And so similar to the Ion Slides migration, we also have a virtual scroll migration on our documentation on the website that shows you how to get set up with each of those three libraries. So that's Ionic 7. It's a very, very big release, a big step forward for Ionic Framework, a project that's been around for several years. Really modernizing and improving that developer experience. And so, as I mentioned before, the release candidate is available now. You can begin to upgrade your applications. We've got a migration guide available on our docs website, and you can expect to see Ionic 7 generally available soon. Let's say soon.
Never want to give an exact date, just in case. And we'll get a little link showing up to point to the migration guide. This is awesome. I know with each new major release of Ionic, I always wonder, like, what are we going to do next? And it's great to see that we constantly have new ways that we can improve, simplify, and just fit in better with a greater developer community. Like the V improvement in compatibility is something that I think goes beyond just the Vue community and potentially even to the React folks as well. So exciting to see all that. Thank you so much, Liam. That's amazing. I'm super excited for V7. I'll let you get back to your day, so that way you can, push a few more commits for V7. And we got Sean coming up next, who's going to be talking about Stencil. You did mention Stencil in the framework update, so let's hear what's going on in Stencil land. All right, hey Sean, thank you so much for joining us today. Now I gotta ask, this is your first Ionic show, correct?
This is. I've been an attendee for a couple years. I've hung out in the Discord channels, celebrating all of the cool things that Ionic's been working on over the past few years. And this is my first year speaking, which I'm very excited about.
Well, I'm so happy that you're here with us today. Why don't you give yourself a quick little introduction, so that way everyone in the community knows who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So hello, everyone. I'm Sean Perkins. I am the engineering manager for Stencil and Ionic Framework. If you've been hanging out in the Ionic Framework space, you've probably seen me triaging issues, submitting pull requests, and doing that type of thing. I'm very excited to kind of extend that further into the Stencil community and get into all things web components.
Well, then let's get right into it. What's going on inside of the world of Stencil?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very excited that we've released Stencil v3. Stencil v3 has been out for a little over a month now. And the focus of Stencil v3 was really on modernizing the code base. So one of our prime focuses was dropping legacy or deprecating legacy browser support. So we've dropped / deprecated legacy support for Safari 10 and Internet Explorer 11. So for those of you that have been hanging out and having to support IE 11 because Stencil supported IE 11, you can kill support for that now. We've also updated the minimum node version to version 14. Some of the other changes we've worked on is improving the developer experience, specifically around some of the default configurations that Stencil ships with. So if you upgrade to Stencil v3, source maps will now be enabled by default. Type declaration files will also be generated if you use disk custom elements output. As always, with everything Stencil, it's very configurable. So if you don't need these defaults or you want to turn them off, you can do that absolutely, and those are called out in the documentation. Another thing that we've also been working on top of just Stencil v3 is we also have a brand new Stencil.js site. So we have a brand new homepage with a fresh new design. Our documentation has also been updated. We have new code snippets, examples, and we also have a migration guide to take developers from Stencil v2 to Stencil v3.
Yeah, that's new Stencil website is awesome. I know there's been like a real dedicated amount of effort going into updating the docs whenever you find out that they just need a once over, so to speak. For instance, the migration or the integration guides for Angular and how to get up the Angular output target. That was completely overhauled and refreshed, and it's so clear, it's easy to understand, and you have all of the necessary information in one place to just be able to I'm here. I've added the Angular output target. Life's good.
Yeah, I mean, our focus has always been with Stencil of we want developers to be able to write web components once and consume those in all these different frameworks that their consumers might be wanting to leverage their design system in. So inversely to that, another focus of ours is making it as easy for you as the developer to build that experience. So how do we make it so that way your Stencil web components feel like Angular components when developers consume those? And that whole story goes from docs to framework wrappers to the end experience of the user as well.
Well, it's clear to see the focus on developer experience is there, from writing those components to consuming those components. So it sounds like there's been a lot of work going on in Stencil. Is there anything else that you can tell us? Anything broader web news that could potentially be influential for Stencil?
Yeah, absolutely. There's kind of two things I probably want to touch on. One of them is element internals. If you've been following WebKit recently, they were the last browser engine kind of holding out support for it, and WebKit's really been surprising us in 2023. So with element internal support, for those that are not familiar, it allows web components to participate fully in an HTML form. And the benefit of this is it exposes what's called the accessibility object model, which allows web components to be interacted with and navigated easily with screen readers. So it's really a win-win for everyone. It makes your web components more accessible. And then as a result of that, more users and developers can consume those. And then the other kind of behind the scenes thing that we're really excited that we're investigating actively in Stencil v3 is just our test infrastructure. So currently developers that write with Stencil can test with Jest 27 and then versions of Puppeteer that are 10 or higher. We realize that there's a lot of great candidates in the testing library space and very sought after alternatives. So we're actively investigating a way that we can open up our test infrastructure. So that way, if you're using Stencil, you might be able to use Playwright from Microsoft, for example, or Cypress more easily with your Stencil libraries.
Well, that is awesome. That is so good to hear. Yeah, I don't have anything else I want to ask. I'm just super impressed to see where the team is going, what the team's been working on, and it's a good day for Stencil developers. They can they have great resources and great docs, and also an amazing new release to sink their teeth into. So thank you so much, Sean. Thanks for joining us. I've been on screen too much already, so what I'm going to do is we're going to kick us both out, and we're going to bring up Connor in Dallas to talk a little bit about Web Native.
All right, what is going on, everybody? Connor Simmons here, Product Marketing Manager for Enterprise Application Development. Of course, thank you to Mike, Liam, and Sean for all those updates on Framework and Stencil. It's awesome to see all these updates being made available for our community. With that, let's turn focus to my guest for the day, Dallas James, our Product Manager for Web Native Solutions. How are we doing, Dallas?
Doing great, Connor. Thanks for asking. How about yourself?
Doing good, doing good. Happy to talk some capacitor today.
Awesome.
So I think it makes sense to give everybody a quick refresher on what Web Native actually means. Can you do that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So web native is this idea that teams can and should build modern web applications and then combine them with tools like Capacitor that unlock powerful native APIs to the apps for the platform that it's running on. It's about providing this full capability and access to developers of the web platform with the full functionality and performance benefits of traditional native applications. We like to think of web native development as hybrid, if you might remember that term, right? It's hybrid done right. And Capacitor as the platform is at the crux of that all.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it's important for everybody to not just understand Capacitor is enabling the delivery of an app on multiple platforms from a single code base, but the what and the why behind that. And so one of our whys, of course, is accelerating app development. But let's touch on the what here. So that would be some of the plugins that unlock these powerful features for web native apps. And I've heard you have an update for us on one of Capacitor's long-standing authentication and security plugins.
Yeah, absolutely. So Auth Connect, which is our solution that streamlines single sign-on and secure user authentication for your Ionic capacitor applications, has been entirely re-architected for version 4. There's two main changes that I really want to speak to here about Auth Connect 4. The first is the switch from building Auth Connect as a Cordova plugin to now building it as a capacitor plugin. This is exciting because Auth Connect 4 is really the first plugin available from Ionic that supports building a capacitor plugin that not only works for capacitor, but also you can use in Cordova applications. We're excited for this change because it means that companies that are looking to build plugins that support the more modern capacitor apps, but they also need to support the legacy Cordova applications, are no longer stuck just building plugins using Cordova. They can now take advantage of all of the polish, all of the improved developer experience that capacitor plugins bring, and still reach all of the customers wherever they're at. So the other big change with Auth Connect is moving to this more stateless plugin architecture. This is great because it allows us to give more control to the developers who are implementing the plugin and things like managing your authentication state, interacting with custom providers, and it's easier to integrate into more functional oriented applications. And this is now all possible with these latest updates.
That's impressive stuff, Dallas, from you and the team. And I know it's going to be such a beneficial shift in architecture that I'm sure will serve the devs out there really well. And I've heard some murmurs of something new on the security front too. What else is the capacitor team up to?
Yeah, so security is one of our top priorities. We support a lot of large-scale enterprises that require, a very complex and highly secure requirements for their applications. So one thing that we've heard from a lot of teams that we've been looking for is a new SSL plugin. And today's your lucky day, and that's because our team is building that, and we're really excited about this. So Capacitor's upcoming SSL pinning plugin is going to continue to bolster our commercial offerings for these security solutions. This is going to work to add an additional layer of security to your apps by guarding against man-in-the-middle attacks using a certificate handshaking process. Ultimately, it strengthens the security posture of your apps and it makes it less vulnerable to attacks. And all of this is done, and it's built on top of the latest addition to Capacitor, the Capacitor HTTP plugin.
That's awesome. Yeah, now more than ever, it's important to architect our apps with security best practices in mind. And I'm sure you got something else for us. Can I get a little Steve Jobs, maybe one more thing moment?
Sure. There's always one more thing I could talk
That's
about
right.
all day long. So one of the other big projects that we're working on behind the scenes of all of this is a brand new capacitor plugin. This is a brand new background tasks plugin. So one thing that developers might be familiar with is that background tasks in hybrid with Cordova or capacitor has always been an extra challenge. And so we are working on building a brand new plugin that will facilitate writing background tasks for your capacitor applications using the JavaScript that you're already familiar with writing.
Oh, that's awesome. And do you have any examples of how we could use that in our apps?
Yeah, sure. So we really see this as useful for applications that need to do tasks like background syncs, or perhaps updating location data without the user needing to actively interact with the application. This will make apps more efficient and they make them more user-friendly overall.
Yeah, that's great. I definitely can see the benefits of that. Well, thanks, Dallas, for sharing all the information with everybody. I think we've left them with plenty to be excited about. I know I am.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really excited about all of these upcoming updates, and we have big plans for Capacitor throughout the year. Definitely reach out if anyone has any questions on any of these newer updated plugins, or where we're taking Capacitor in the future. I'm always happy to chat.
Sounds great. All right, I think that wraps it up for us on the Web Native team. Next up, I'll hand it off to our AppFlow team. Over to you, Cecilia.
Thanks so much, Connor. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here and to hear all about these new things happening in the Ionic world. It's also very exciting to be participating in my first Ionic show, not as an attendee, but from behind the scenes as part of the team. So I'm Cecilia Martinez. I'm the new developer advocate for AppFlow, the mobile DevOps platform built by Ionic. And I'm joined by my teammates and some familiar faces for you all, Matt Netko and Ashwini Shukla. Both are product managers for AppFlow and have some updates to share today. So to kick things off, let's go to Ashwini. Shwini, you joined the team last year and have been working on expanding AppFlow support for other platforms. How has that been going so far?
Thank you, Cecilia, for the quick intro. And I must say, it's been so much fun to work on this AppFlow team as part of Ionic. AppFlow has been playing a critical role in the Ionic app CI/CD space for a while. And we're so excited to officially announce beta for traditional native applications as well. Those of you who joined us last Ionic Q3 show know that we launched beta for React Native then, which is now in general availability. We continue to believe that each app development team in your organization should have freedom to choose whatever mobile architecture they want, but still be able to orchestrate one tool for all the CI/CD needs that keep it all streamlined for you. So by adding support for other mobile platforms, we want AppFlow to be that tool for your organization. Now with support from Ionic, React Native, and traditional native in AppFlow, we're really excited about what AppFlow can offer to not only just our Ionic developer community, but beyond.
That's really great to hear. And so is the process different for building traditional native apps in AppFlow versus Capacitor or React Native apps?
In AppFlow, we are always focused on keeping it simple and consistent. So the short answer is no, there's really not much difference. As I am highlighting in this demo, all you do is just choose your import option. You decide what the app name is, select your app type, connect your repo, and that's it. And then your app is an AppFlow to start building. It's a very simple process. And when you're ready, find your commit, and you can just simply start building by selecting your build stack and then just kicking off a build. Once you get to a point that you're ready to actually publish your app, simply go ahead, provide us with your certificates and profiles, and we will do the rest to get your app uploaded to the app stores and Google Play stores. In the interest of time, I'm not going to waiting for this build to finish, but instead switch over to another organization that has some existing apps that show you what a successful or a failed build looks like and how easy it is to read on a build if needed. So let's say if your build failed for a minor or some kind of networking glitch or something like that, and you just simply want to start do it again, you can just be on the screen and just click the restart build, and that's it. You have another build running for you. So it's a very simple process to keep your builds running in AppFlow. We do link these together, so you will always know which build was a rerun versus which was the original first-time build, so you can keep track of all your activities correctly. So it's pretty straightforward that way.
Nice. Yeah, I know I always have an instinct if something goes wrong to just try it again and see what happens. It looks like it's very simple to get started, so thanks for sharing. I know for me, it's been really fun learning more about traditional native developers and their workflows and kind of how AppFlow can handle some of those more tedious parts of that process. Something else that I've been learning more about is all the different solutions that Ionic offers and how they work together. Matt, can you talk a little bit more about one of the newest integrations for AppFlow?
Yes, I'm really excited to share that we've made some recent improvements to the integration of Trapeze within AppFlow. Now, if you haven't heard of Trapeze yet, it's our native and cross-platform mobile project configuration tool. You use a simple YAML-based configuration file format, and with it, you can automate your project configuration for all types of mobile apps, including, of course, traditional iOS and Android apps, as well as cross-platform based framework ones, including Ionic, Capacitor, React Native, Flutter, basically everything you can imagine on the mobile front. And we've made some recent changes to AppFlow to ensure that Trapeze has a smooth experience, which includes the ability to use one Trapeze file for both your iOS and Android builds in AppFlow.
Yeah, Trapeze is super interesting to me because this sounds like another example of how the team is really focusing on supporting mobile developers across all platforms and all frameworks. And I understand that you have a demo for us.
Yes, let's check it out. All right, so looking here on the left, I have Visual Studio Code with my trapeze file, ci.yaml, and on the right is my AppFlow build screen. And basically what we're going to do today is automate the incrementation of the build number, which comes from AppFlow on the right-hand side there, and the app version itself. And so we're using those CI build number and AppFlow app version number to increment those in the file. And then on the right, we have environments. We're going to use those and set the app version to 1.5. So keep that in mind as we go through this. And basically, every time we run the build, it's going to increment those values. Here in package.json, I'm using the special appflow build special script command and basically saying if we're running an iOS or Android build, execute trapeze run on that YAML file that we just were looking at, and automatically it's going to detect if we're running on iOS or Android and just run those subset of commands and run all of that for us, as long as it's not a web-based deployment. And then over here in AppFlow, I'm going to kick off a new iOS build using iOS as the example. And so we're going to choose development and a development type of build and certificates. And then, of course, leverage that version name environment file so that 1.5 value gets passed into the build as well. And I'm going to click the build button. Now we're going to skip all the actual build details and go right to the result with a successful iOS build. You'll notice that the AppFlow build script has ran successfully. And I have set the build number to 27, which is the same as that number 27 at the top there for my build. The iOS version number has been set to 1.5, which is great. That's what how we're controlling that through the environment. And because this is an iOS build only, we are skipping the Android commands. So with all of that, I've automated with Trapeze and AppFlow my entire build version and app version number situation. I had all in one.
Very, very cool. I definitely love seeing more options for automations, and I'm sure that developers watching also appreciate that as well. AppFlow really is all about making the mobile deployment process easier, right? And one thing that we know can be tricky for mobile developers is quickly creating and sharing builds with other members of the team. Ashwini, can you share more about how AppFlow can help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in order to further expedite your builds, we do offer similar builds for iOS that do not require any certificates or provisioning profiles set up beforehand. That way you can quickly run through the complete build process and have a successful native build within minutes. As you can see in this demo here, all you do is select the similar build type. The build just creates a .app file that you can download locally. Just unzip it, extract the app from it, and just drag and drop it on the similar of your choice. And that's it. Here you can actually have an app that you can quickly play with. This is a great way for your QA team to get access to it and be able to share. If you ask any developer about their experience with working, especially with the iOS developers, for their experience working with signing certs and provisional profiles, you will definitely hear that it's a very confusing and cumbersome process. So the similar builds are a great way to quickly validate your app implementation and get it working as you expected, even before you spend that time and effort to get the app set up for an app store deployment. We haven't forgotten about the Android developers, so we do actually have a quick app review option available for you as well. You'll notice this QR code next to the successful debug build for Android, and all you do is just scan it with your camera and get your app loaded on the phone so you can quickly test it. So anyone on your team can do it, and that's a great way to get you up and running quickly for either platform.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super exciting. Thanks for that demo. I was actually able to test simulator builds out myself, and I built and opened an app made by somebody else, didn't have access to the code base or the Xcode project, and it was super easy. Yeah. We do have a new blog post out too, highlighting both simulator builds and the Android QR code preview, and kind of all the other ways that AppFlow can help you deploy to test devices. So make sure to check that out. Awesome. So what else can we expect coming this quarter in AppFlow? Matt, why don't you start us off? Do you have some insights for us?
Yeah, sure thing. Absolutely. We have been quite busy, as you've heard so far. First, we are working towards bringing our newer capacitor-based live updates plugin up to parity with our legacy Cordova-based one. This plugin was originally created for our self-hosted live update solution built for the enterprise, released this past fall. And now we're working to expand its capabilities so that it will eventually replace the Cordova version, as well as extend it with lots of new great features that we can do now that it's built with more on a native side and native libraries. Next, we'll update the user experience for Ionic portals within AppFlow. Portals, of course, works really well today within AppFlow, but we have some portal-specific UI and UX changes we want to make. So keep an eye out for those. And then finally, our teams are always focused on the safety and security of the AppFlow platform and securing our customers' data. So in June, as a follow-up to our Type 1 certification, we will be earning our SOC 2 Type 2 certification. So it's a nice stamp of approval from a third party to show that we are a great option to use and safe and secure.
Love that. Very exciting stuff. Ashwini, is there anything else that you want to add?
Absolutely. So now with the addition of React Native and traditional native to our portfolio, we are definitely doubling down our efforts on making your native builds experience as smooth and as efficient as possible. With that, we have plenty of features in our pipeline for this initiative that we are prioritizing. We also recently completed a round of user interviews that have given us a really valuable insight that's going to help us make better informed decisions about what to build when. So we're really excited about a few things that are coming up our way. But I'm not going to give any spoilers here, so kind of just stay tuned as we announce those in near future.
All right, no spoilers, but yeah, those user interviews were really fascinating, and I cannot wait to see what comes from them. So, well, that's all that we have for you today from the AppFlow team. If you want to stay up to date on AppFlow product releases, upcoming events, and new resources, make sure to follow us at Use AppFlow on Twitter. And so that's all for us. Next, we have Vivek and Josh to talk more about portals.
That's great. Thanks so much, Cecilia, Ashwini, and Matt Neko. Fantastic to get an update on what's going on with our, flagship mobile CI/CD solution to help build apps for not just Cordova Capacitor, React Native, and native apps, and sounds like a lot more coming down the pipeline. I'm Vivek Mano. I work here in product marketing at Ionic, and I'm joined with Josh Thomas, who is our product manager for portals.
Hello, great to be here.
Let's kick it off, Josh. So you and I have sat in on a number of conversations lately, and you can kind of feel the buzz around micro front ends and portals. But with all that buzz and excitement, it does feel like some customers and developers are having a tough time proving it out. What is the team been working on lately to address not just the interest in micro front ends, but how to get them up and running as quickly as possible?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that was mentioned in the earlier talk from Matt Netko was talking about how portals is coming closer into AppFlow as a first-class citizen. And I think that's going to be really important for ensuring that we have a holistic perspective on what the product looks like from our customers. I think that bringing all of these different pieces together, web and native and architects, and building a solution is a complicated task where you're facilitating a lot of different collaborations. One of the things that we're doing recently is creating web starters so that if you have an existing native application, you can use one of our starters from the Ionic CLI or coming through AppFlow itself, and you can see a demo of what's possible, to where that web application is already set up for portals and already showing you what the communication and facilitating that looks like. We're hoping that's something that's going to be easy for native developers to make use of and include in their applications, but also someone who's trying to prove it out from the architectural perspective.
That's really cool. So basically, native developers don't have to build a web app. You'll give them something pre-canned, ready to run.
Right. The ability to prove it out without having to write any web code at all. And then whenever they proved it out and there's an example application set up in AppFlow, then maybe a web team can take it over from that point.
That's awesome. Are there any other quality of life improvements you see happening with portals?
There's a few changes that we've made. One of those being the ability to include assets. So one of the questions we had been asked quite a bit is if I'm creating 5 different portals experiences and they're using similar assets like images, well, I'm going to have to replicate that over across the 5 different experiences on device and take up a lot of space. So recently we've included something called asset maps, which is the idea of having a singular location on your device to share all of those assets across the different portals so that you can update an image one time in a single location, and then every portal can point to it as though it is their own. And that's something that lots of larger organizations have asked for.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to see where the product keeps evolving in the future. I'm going to put my marketing hat on for a second because, we listen to what the large analysts talk about all the time, where the market's going, what companies are asking for. And one thing that caught my eye is that Gartner has identified super apps as one of the major trends we'll see in 2023. And I feel like that's right up your alley. What are you seeing out there?
Absolutely. I think that we're seeing a lot of interest in super apps. And it may not be from the place that you think it is, right? When you think of super apps, you think of it from like a consumer-based, very popular in China, and maybe Facebook is doing something like this with super apps. But what we're seeing is from a lot of internal applications. The ability to create a super app to facilitate many different applications that might be built for internal users or people who work at the company. And I think that that's something that makes a lot of sense for the ability to create a single location, a single authentication mechanism, so that all of your apps can just come in based on that user's profile without having the users themselves having to deal with like 15 different apps and understand which one they should have access to. Rather, that's just mini apps that come together as part of a larger super app.
That's pretty cool.
Actually, one great example, there's a national grocery store chain in the UK and one in the US even that are building this for an inventory management system internally, where when a grocery store clerk logs in or a different manager of the grocery store logs in, that they have different experiences and different applications that are available to them, and not having to worry about managing all of this through your MDM solution, but rather just using a single application and the authentication mechanisms and authorization mechanisms you already have in place makes a lot of sense.
I think that makes sense. Well, Mike joked about it with Max at the opening that this could be the year of PWAs. I think it's going to be the year of super apps, and we're just going to get more requests as time goes on.
I agree. I think that the more we talk about it, the more we're going to get questions about it. And hopefully there's going to be a grand realization in a lot of organizations that super apps make a lot of sense.
Makes sense. A lot of the folks on here build capacitor applications. So I'm going to take a moment to talk about micro front-ends for capacitor apps, which, just so the whole group knows, we're now going to be calling federated capacitor. And when we first launched federated capacitor, the focus was on large organizations. Our hypothesis was that these large orgs wanted to enable smaller autonomous teams to ship on their own schedule. What's changed on that front recently? I feel like you've had a revelation recently.
Yeah, I think that that's still important, right? And we've seen that from people taking their larger applications, breaking it down into a mono repo where the monolith becomes smaller micro front ends. But one of the other things we've seen is people wanting access from like what we call a poly repo perspective, where there might be the main application, but there's other web-based micro front ends that have been developed at the organization that they want to make use of in their capacitor apps as well. That's not really the primary purpose of why we built this, but it makes perfect sense. If your organization's going all in on micro front ends, why wouldn't you want to do that? And I think that we've made a few changes into federated capacitor recently to allow for that, to where you not only have to manage it from a single repository and bring all the files together through a mono repo, but you can point to different repositories and allow for AppFlow to control what is available to you and be able to download those at build time.
That's awesome. Okay. And Yeah, I think this is fantastic. That's a great update. What's happening on portals? Just, the product's been out for just a little bit more than a year. Any closing thoughts or anything you want to mention to our audience about what you learned talking to probably hundreds of portals customers at this point?
I think that one of the things we learned is how important it is for web developers to understand um, what their experience is when they're building the application, not only from people who are consuming it from a website, but also if you're consuming it in a mobile application. There's very different expectations from a user. And we've actually introduced something to bring Web Vitals closer and more available to people who are using portals, so that native teams can look at how long it's taking for web views to load and to inform web developers on the performance metrics that are important to them. And I think that when we started this, we didn't really think about that as much. But we knew that it was important to have performant web applications, but it really truly is something that you have to double down on and ensure the performance of those web applications. It's really important to ensure that it feels like a holistic experience in the larger native application. I think one of the things that I've learned most of all, though, is how this concept crosses industries. And that's what's something that's really interesting and really important for us going forward.
Well, I'm excited to hear the updates at our Q2 show. But for now, Josh, thanks so much for the portals update. Look forward to chatting to you soon.
Thanks, feedback.
All right. And with that, I think we're going to bring everybody up on screen. I'll let Mike help us out here, but we're going to jump right into the live Q&A. I'm sure we have lots of questions from the audience. So if not, throw them in the chat. We'll take them as they come.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Hopefully, audio's coming in good. Let's get everyone back up onto the stage. So, in order of appearance, we got Liam, Sean, we have Dallas, Sweeney, Neko, Josh, and then finally, the man who started it all, Mr. Max Lynch. How's everyone doing today?
Oh, good.
Good.
This has been such a fantastic Ionic show. We came pretty much right at the hour too, so I don't know how much time we will have for some Q&A, but I do want to shout out a few questions that I did see pop up in the chat. Chat, if you have any questions, please just go ahead and drop them in there. But I do want to highlight this comment first from Mr. Michael Wilkinson's, highlighting how impressive Portals is. Curious why aren't any enterprises jumping all over this? And we'll use this as our platform for their first question, and we're going to pass this to Josh. Why aren't enterprises jumping all over this?
Because they don't know about it yet.
Simple as that. So you're telling me we need to tweet more, we need to write more blog posts, we just need to do more about everything.
Yeah, I think this is what I mentioned. It's kind of a difficult and interesting problem because the product sits between multiple teams. It's not isolated to a single technology, into a single team. So it really takes buy-in from a lot of the different pieces of an organization. And usually in order to pull something like that off, you've got to have an architect involved. So I think that you just have to have the right person looking at the product to really understand how it's going to be transformative for the organization.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I know hearing this just based on hearing your conversations, they're very difficult conversations or a very long-lasting conversation. So, Liam, this was asked in the chat earlier, so we're gonna ask you again. Any timeline, any rough estimate for V7? When can people expect the new?
Soon. Well, let me put it this way. If you don't count the number of days, if you don't count the days between today and when Ionic 7 comes out, it's technically already out when you think of it. But we'll just say soon to make that easier.
I get it. I get it now. Took me a little bit, but I got it. Awesome. We will bring this up because It's a capacitor question, and we're going to spread all the questions out as much as we can. Any advances in using SQLite inside of capacitor? Who wants to jump and take this one? Dallas? Anybody?
Yeah, I think that one falls pretty squarely to me. So mean, I'm curious in terms of like what you're looking for in terms of using SQLite. I know there's a handful of plugins out there that you can use for SQLite. If you're in the enterprise use case where high performance and security is a big concern for your company, you want to make sure that your user sessions are secured. We do have the secure storage plugin that is built on top of SQLite and offers kind of all of that encryption. Yeah, if there's anything in particular that you're looking for that you feel like is missing from Capacitor, definitely reach out either on Twitter or on Discord. Hang out in both of those places. And, I'd love to chat and see what you're missing.
And I think this goes for every product that we talked about today. There are dedicated Discord channels for most things between Framework and its different flavors, Stencil, Capacitor, and even some AppFlow channels as well. If you have any questions, please go into the Discord and ask away. We'd love to see you be successful and love to help you as much as we possibly can. This is a question that I'm pretty excited to answer. Oh, not that one. This is what happens when people put in a question and I scroll. Any news about the conference? About our annual conference, IoniConf. Well, I'm happy to say that this year we are doing IoniConf in person. We are going to be doing IoniConf in person later this year. We still have some details that we are working out, but you can expect to see everyone from the Ionic team, everyone just coming together. We'll have more details to share. So expect an official blog post and everything. But yeah, IoniConf is happening, and it's happening in person. It won't just be this YouTube stream thing that we've been doing. We're excited to be hosting it live and hope to see all of you there if you can make it. Okay, so we are pretty much at the hour. I think that's kind of the big thing that we want to get across. Any other comments, any other things that people want to add? Max, did you have any closing comments?
No, but I want to thank everyone for joining, and it's good to get these going regularly again. So stay tuned for some big news on the conference. We're not quite ready to talk about it yet, but we are doing it in person, which is going to be a lot of fun. It's terrifying doing in-person conference, but it's going to be so awesome getting the community together. So stay tuned for that.
And with that, unless anyone else has anything to add, thank you all for hanging out today. This has been a fantastic Ionic show. We look forward to seeing you all again when we do this in another quarter. But enjoy the rest of your day, night, morning. Take care, everyone.